September.
Well,
back to you.
Those waters are certainly on the mind of our next guest, Adam Shapiro. Thank you very much, because joining us right now is Congressman Steve Scalise of Louisiana here on C. It's great to have you in New York, sir.
Great to be here.
Let's talk about, in particular, something you've been very vocal about, very passionate about, very angry about. That's the moratorium on offshore drilling. What are you hearing from the folks in Louisiana about the fact that a lot of these rigs have now left the Gulf for foreign waters?
Well, right now in South Louisiana, this moratorium on drilling is the biggest concern of people that you talk to. And, you know, of course, we're hoping that the well is successfully capped, and we seem like we're close to a point where we're going to have a full seal on the well. But this moratorium is actually already starting to have an impact on job losses. The President's own Safety Commission that did a 30-day report after the explosion of the Deepwater Horizon said that it actually reduces safety in the Gulf to have a moratorium. They oppose a moratorium, the President's own scientists. Unfortunately, they're still going forward with it. And what we're trying to do is push the President to lift this moratorium, impose the new safety regulations that we all support, things that every other company was doing except BP, get new safety regulations in place to make sure this doesn't happen again, but lift the moratorium, because we're already seeing job losses that should not be occurring, but they are.
We were talking about jobs, Alan. That's what we've been talking about all hour.
No, and we talked about this earlier, Cheryl. If your focus is on jobs, what's happening in you shut down drilling in the Gulf, that's a lot more jobs than I think sending Ford Explorers overseas will ever be. So it's a really, really important issue. Look, one of the problems I have, though, with this debate in Washington is, like so many debates in Washington, it becomes so polarized. If we're ever going to deal with our energy problems, you got to deal with the supply issue, which is what you're talking about. We've got to keep drilling where there's oil, because we know we're going to need it for a long time to come. But you also have to start to deal with the demand issue. How do we start to wean the country off of oil and into alternative resources? And I think too often people take either one side or the other and don't realize it's going to take a combination of both to solve the problem.
Well, Congressman, he brings up a great point that a lot of, I think, Americans have. When they watch what happens in Washington, they become frustrated. Everything ends up being politically motivated. You've got the midterm elections coming up in November, and then nothing gets done. In particular, with the moratorium on offshore drilling, if nothing gets done politically, those jobs are gone and will not come back for years. Those workers and those rigs will not come back for years. How do you get over the political fighting that you know you're going to face?
And unfortunately, this shouldn't be a political issue. In fact, I had an amendment that would have ended the moratorium. It would have said if you follow the new safety regulations, then you can get the permit. I had bipartisan support for that amendment, over 50 members of Congress, Republicans and Democrats. But there is a political side of this, unfortunately. And yes, you know, long term, we all want to diversify our portfolio of energy. We need a broad, comprehensive energy policy that uses all of the resources that this country has, so that we can reduce our dependence on Middle Eastern oil. We've got the ability to do that with a better policy, but actually imposing this moratorium makes our country more dependent on Middle Eastern oil. And in fact, 70% of all the oil spills come from imported oil on tankers. So this only increases the likelihood of future spills, and then we lose our crew bases. We lose those rigs. That's something that you can't just reverse. If you do this for 6 months and then you try to say, okay, well, let's start it back up again 6 months later, a lot of those jobs are already gone. A lot of those skilled workers are already gone. So this has long-term impacts if it goes much longer. And we're already seeing, last week, Baker Hughes, a company operating out of Houston, laid off 300 people along the Gulf Coast. You're seeing families pay the price for a political decision made because of BP's mistake that other companies weren't making, and yet why are they punishing everybody in an industry for the acts of one?
And Baker Hughes, if I'm not mistaken, Congressman, they took, 25% of their assets and also moved that overseas. I mean, they really are making the move overseas more than any other, even Diamond Offshore or anybody else right now.
They're going to foreign countries, Egypt, Congo, other countries, and we're losing those valuable assets, and then our country becomes less secure from an energy position.
It really comes down to priorities, Cheryl. The President has a lot of priorities, and how you weigh them is what's really important. He says he wants to double exports. That's the right thing to do. You will never get there if you shut down drilling in the Gulf of Mexico. I mean, if jobs and exports is really your top priority, then you have to look at these kinds of decisions through that filter.
Are you having these conversations behind the scenes? I mean, do you think that there maybe is possibly an understanding within the administration that at some point they're going to have to back off of this moratorium because of the job losses, because of the dependence on foreign oil?
Well, I think now that the oil is not flowing out of that well every day, people are starting to shift away from that. But people are now starting to look at this moratorium and saying, wait a minute, why is this policy in place? It was presented as jobs versus safety by the administration. But now people are realizing it's jobs and safety versus a political decision, because jobs are being lost and it's actually making things less safe. So hopefully we can continue to get people to understand there is a way out of this. There's a way to increase safety. The scientists that the president himself appointed said there are things that we can do today to increase safety in the deep water that don't lose the jobs, that don't run out the industry. But that's got to be done very soon. We've got a short window where this policy needs to be reversed. Otherwise, it's too late.
Congressman Steve Scalise, we'd love to have you on the show again, especially if you're here in New York. It's great to have you on set.
Great to be here.
All right.